The New Yorker Festival marks its 5th year this weekend with writers, artists, scholars, journalists, filmmakers, and about-town excursions. And now to Times Square studios for live coverage. First, a panel on neoconservatism and the war in Iraq with authors Ken Edelman, Mark Danner, David Frum, and Katha Pollitt. And coming up at 4 this afternoon,
Good afternoon and welcome to today's panel on the future of neoconservatism. I've been instructed to instruct you to turn off cell phones and paging devices. And there will be about 30 minutes of Q&A after our discussion here. And if you have a question, and I do mean a question, please line up and speak at the microphone, which will be available once we come to that part of the discussion. I want to introduce our panelists. Ken Edelman has held numerous positions in government, including Assistant to Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld in the Ford administration, Director of U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, and Deputy U.S. Representative to the United Nations under President Reagan. He's currently a member of the Defense Policy Board. Edelman is the author of 5 books and is national editor of the Washingtonian magazine. And he and his wife Carol run Movers and Shakespeare's, which provides executive training using case studies from Shakespeare's plays. Titus Andronicus, anyone? For many years, he taught Shakespeare at George Washington University and National Security Studies at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service. And I'm sure there's not another human being on earth about whom you could say those two things. Katha Pollitt is a columnist at The Nation magazine and a poet and essayist whose work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New Republic, and other magazines. Her collection of poems, Antarctic Traveler, won the National Book Critics Circle Award. Pollitt is also the author of 2 essay collections, Reasonable Creatures, Essays on Women and Feminism, and Subject to Debate, Sense and Dissents on Women, Politics, and Culture. A former Guggenheim Fellow, she's taught poetry at Barnard College and the 92nd Street Y, and has also taught women's studies in the graduate program at the New School. Mark Danner is the author of The Massacre at El Mozote, a parable of the Cold War, which was originally published as an entire issue of the New Yorker magazine, where Danner is a staff writer. He's a frequent contributor to the New York Review of Books. A former MacArthur Fellow, Danner's reported from Central America, the former Yugoslavia, Haiti, and Iraq. He's professor of journalism at UC Berkeley and Henry R. Luce professor at Bard College. And his book, The Road to Illegitimacy, has just been published, and Torture and Truth, Abu Ghraib, America and the War on Terror will be published later this month. And David Frum, to my left, is the author of 5 books, most recently The Right Man, The Surprise Presidency of George Bush, and with Richard Pearl, An End to Evil, How to Win the War on Terror, both of which were New York Times bestsellers. He was a special assistant to the president for economic speechwriting in 2001 to 2. He's currently a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a contributing editor to National Review, where he writes a daily online column. I want to start with a general question that I'd like each of you to take a crack at in turn, and then we'll get into some more particular questions about the topic of the panel. And unfortunately, the word neoconservative or neoconservatism has grown so loaded that it can almost mean anything to anyone. And so I'd like to set some terms of definition today. So when we use the word, which is perhaps a necessary evil, we have to use some word to describe what we're talking about today. Here's what I mean by neoconservatism. I mean an attitude toward America's role in the world and its foreign policy strategy, which emphasizes the need for, if necessary, preemptive war, a focus on the connection between terrorism and rogue states, a doctrine of expanding free societies and free markets around the world, and an emphasis on the preeminence of American power over all other nations and powers. And if anyone has any objections to that, then we'll talk about it afterward. But those are the terms of the debate for today. So what I want to ask each of you is, has neoconservatism died in Iraq? Ken Edelman, what do you think?
Well, not if you listened to Cy Hirsch and David Remnick last night. I was mortified by their discussion, to tell you the truth, on neoconservatism last night, and the way Cy Hirsch thought of this as a gigantic conspiracy that led us into Iraq in a way with an empty president, and, you know, Wolfowitz and Pearl and others he named, and a way that just seemed dark, it seemed dastardly, it seemed awful. I thought it was a very bad way to describe everything, and it left out some essential elements that if David, who I admire a lot because I think he's a phenomenal editor and a very, very nice person, but if he hadn't been pandering so much to the audience as he was, he would have really questioned Cy Hirsch. For example, Cy Hirsch had this tremendous conspiracy going on, and the fact is there was no great conspiracy. In 1998, the Congress passed a resolution that Saddam Hussein was bad news for the world and should be changed. This was the Congress. President Bill Clinton signed this legislation. Now, this is not the stuff of great conspiracies, all right? You had lots of comments from Madeleine Albright, from Bill Clinton and others that Saddam Hussein was bad news and the world would be better off with it. You then had a Congress in 2002 of which voted overwhelmingly that we should have go to war, or at least authorize the president to go to war in Iraq. That was a public debate. There was no great conspiracy. To quote Julius Caesar, you know, conspiracy should be made of sterner stuff than this. And the fact is that a majority of Democrats voted for the resolution. And number three, what really drove me up the wall, if I may say, is that David Remnick was sitting right there who supported going into Iraq. He thought it was a good idea to get rid of Saddam Hussein, and he was brave to do it.
But can I ask
he
you,
didn't say
Ken,
he was part of a
can
conspiracy.
I ask you, Ken, what about where we are now and what has become of that foreign policy strategy that I described?
Oh, you asked me a different question. You asked me about whether neoconservatism was dead because of Iraq. The answer to that is no, because it's thought to be the evil force behind going into Iraq. Very falsely
so are you saying
accused.
That neoconservatism and the war in Iraq don't have a lot to do with each other?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the neoconservative movement is a movement that has defined elements to it, and you mentioned some of them, but you did so in a slightly skewed manner. The fact is, for example, on American preeminence, and people, you know, critics of the administration make this a big point. Well, they're American preeminence, and, you know, this is a big thing. It's a fact of life, all right? It's a fact of the world. Everybody knows that the United States is a preeminent country. It's not good, bad, it's a fact, all right? So that's not part of any kind of foreign policy. The point is that neoconservatism, unlike many things, is, number one, generally associated with Jews and Jewish, and so you have some people, like my former friend Pat Buchanan and others, morph into anti-Semitism with the phrase, which sends hackles to me. But the fact is also that it has an element to it of idealism. It has an element of change. It has an element that wouldn't the world, or especially the Middle East, be a more wonderful place if there was a democracy. Last point to make, Cy Hirsch last night just dumped on this as some kind of part of his dark, secretive, conspiratorial evil. I don't know what's wrong with having Arab people select their own leaders. I don't know what's wrong with having free Arab press. I don't know what's wrong with having Arabs have some rights. I mean, he painted it in the dark terms that he uses for everything he talks about.
Okay, you've said some things that I'd like to get back to, but I want to give Katha Pollitt a chance to maybe shed her own light on my question. What has the Iraq war done to the idea of neoconservatism as I described it?
Well, I think if there were, I almost want to say justice in the world, it would finish it. Since we're quoting Shakespeare here, I found myself thinking of Macbeth at the end, where he says, "I am so steeped in gore, returning were as tedious as go o'er." And he's saying, you know, oh my God, I can't get back to where I was, so I have to just keep fighting and killing. And that's what I fear. I feel if any rational person looking at Iraq today would see a major, major mess that will not be so easy to return to a less mess phase of existence. And so then the easiest thing to do is what I think we see President Bush doing, which is simply refusing to take in any new information, which is everything's great, things are going along, we're going to have elections, our friend Alawi and anyone who sees any problem with what we've done and what's going on is some kind of negativist nabob, nattering away is some kind of member of the media or Dan Rather or whatever. But I think that if you look around, you can see that the extremely ideological and high-minded sounding side of neoconservatism, which is what you were saying, they should be able to choose their own leaders, and we're for women, and let's get rid of Saddam Hussein, and let's just remake, you know, the dominoes that stand up from the table and remake the entire Middle East country by country by invading them, has really run into very serious troubles on the grounds of the actual real life that we all, and real world that we all live in. Now, whether those insights will have any effect on actual foreign policy, I think will depend a lot on the election.
Mm-hmm. Mark Danner, you've been to Iraq, you've reported from it. How would you answer the question in light of what you've seen there and what's happening there now as you understand it?
Well, I think we have to begin with the premise that as we sit here today, the United States is losing the Iraq War. It doesn't mean it will lose, but it means as we sit here today, it is losing. I was in Iraq about 9 months ago, and when I arrived, there were about 17 attacks a day on American forces. In August, month just passed, there were 80 a day. When I was there, you could go into Fallujah, you could report, you could talk to people there. I spent a lot of time there. Now Fallujah is a no-go area. It's under a Taliban-like government. Same with Ramadi, same with a number of other cities in Iraq. When you look at any of what military people call the metrics, the numbers, deaths, Iraqi deaths, American deaths, territory seized, numbers of attacks, the war is going very badly. And you look at it now as compared to a year ago, and it's a bit of a disaster. It's a mess. And there isn't a clear way out or a clear way to solve it. So I think we first have to put away the notion that, you know, Bush argues it's getting better, Kerry argues it's worse, and, you know, it's a political view. It isn't. There are some facts, I think, that are incontrovertible. That doesn't mean that it couldn't improve. It's possible. But there's no sign now that it is improving. I agree with Katha that, you know, the future of neoconservatism, I'm sorry, I'm just laughing because I'm here on a panel about the future of neoconservatism. And, and I'm thinking, I went long ago days to a panel, a big panel on the future of NATO. And there was not only Henry Kissinger, but Anatol Dobrynin, the Soviet ambassador. And they called on Kissinger to speak, and he said, I will defer to the Soviet ambassador, whose views on the future of NATO I'm very interested to hear. So I am the Dobrynin equivalent here, I guess. I guess both of us are.
We weren't going to say that.
I thought I should get it out, you know. I thought I should just get it out, get it out.
On that we agree, all right? Let the record say.
Ken pointed out something very important, I think, which is that some of the elements of neoconservatism are inherent in American history. I mean, these are not aliens who've come down from spaceships. And the notion of spreading democracy, of American idealism, of spreading the American system throughout the world, of the fact that the Declaration of Independence gives certain inalienable rights to people, not just Americans. This notion of the expansion of the American system, which I think is inherent in neoconservatism, is part of American history. And there was a struggle over it very much in the 19th century and the 20th century about whether you should do that through example, through the shining light of the nation, as Daniel Webster said, or through actual military force. And the decision was usually made